Hey, this is John with Two Moose Home Inspections. There was a wildfire in our community and that really shook us. So today we're going to be talking all about fires. Welcome to Inspector Insights. To get you up to speed, on the Ptarmigan Mountain there was a fire, and that fire was less than a quarter mile away from my house. So obviously that's very concerning. And with a fire like this, where we have the wildland-urban interface, where basically our houses are pushed right up against the national forest land, that means that we are at a high risk of having natural events occurring that can put our house and our families at risk. So these natural events, well, shouldn't we want to stop every single fire? No, not really. Fires are actually really good for the ecosystem, for the trees, for the plants, for everything. Fires are a part of the natural order of the way that our forests work. So we need to have fires. And so how does that work? Well, there's a lot of really good articles online, things that you can read, very brief ones, very long ones. But the main thing you need to understand is that trees are perfectly adapted in our area to be accepting of fires. And in fact, fires are a big part of the way that these trees operate and operate well. So how does that work? Well, we have trees that have thicker bark. So that way, whenever a fire does roll through, the tree's not damaged. Then we have trees that have really thick root systems underneath the ground that whenever all of the competition is wiped out by the fire, they can quickly spring up into action and they can start growing to allow them to thrive. So other than root systems, we have pine cones. So there are some trees that have pine cones, like the lodgepole pine, that are just covered in resin or filled with resin, and that basically seals that pine cone, and it's just going to sit there dormant until fire comes through, heats up that resin, and then allows the seeds to come out and allows the tree to grow, the newest tree, to be able to grow the newest tree. So then the other thing is that there are also seeds that whenever the seeds fall down from the pine cones or whatever it may be, that those seeds will not germinate until flames come through and the fire actually heats up those seeds, and then the seeds are going to start germinating. So fire is a very important part of the system of our forests and the way that they work and the way that they grow and the way that they thrive. So we need to have fires. It's just that lately, because we have an overabundance of fuels, we have had fires that are coming through that are so intense and so hot that it burns through the bark and the tree will burn from the core out and be completely killed. It'll fire so intense that the fire will actually burn underneath the ground in these root systems because the heat is just so intense, and that completely kills the tree. We will have fires that are so intense that it totally destroys the pine cones and the seeds therein and the seeds that are on the ground. And so these high intensity fires are not healthy. And there's a good reason how we ended up where we got, but we'll get to that at the end. So let's take a look at the next thing. So this right here is the fire triangle. Now, a lot of people say, well, John, there's now a fire tetrahedron. We're not going to talk about that. We're just going to talk about the fire triangle. So there's a few things that you need to have. And so on this fire triangle, you need to have your heat, you need to have your fuel, and you need to have your oxygen. And so, all right, where do we have the most oxygen? Well, if we have a layer of ground, above we can have oxygen, but below it's all dirt. So there's no oxygen. So half of the sphere, let's say, half of this sphere is now oxygen. But if you take this fire up into the canopy of a tree, then what happens is that now, because we're up high, we now have air, oxygen all the way around. So now we have the opportunity for a more intense fire. So if we can keep the fire on the ground, the fire will be much less intense than if it goes up into the treetops. And that's very important, because oxygen is where one of the ways in which we can have very severe fires. Of course, the fuel source as well, and then the heat. As a fire gets more and more intense, it'll burn more rapidly. But I think oxygen is a really big part of this. So let's take a look at some of these diagrams. On this diagram right here, what we're looking at is that we have all of these what are referred to as ladder fuels. And these ladder fuels, what they do is whenever we have a small smoldering fire that is moving across somewhere, then these ladder fuels are going to cause there to be the ability for the flame to reach up into the canopy of these trees and then start to burn. And once they do, you can see the intensity of that fire is just extreme. So what we want instead is that we want to get rid of any ladder fuels that are in this area. So that way we have these small smoldering fires. Yeah, they're going to get big, but they aren't going to get big enough that they can get up into the canopy, which means that the fire is done faster. It means that it's over faster, and it actually means that it is a healthy fire for the forest. That's a very important distinction. We need to know that it is a healthy fire for the forest. So again, if we go back to the fire triangle, the heat, yes, we can reduce that heat by eliminating the amount of fuel and the amount of oxygen. Okay, so we can't really directly affect the heat. unless we're pouring water on the fire, but there needs to be a significant amount. So let's just say we can't really do very much about the heat at the moment. But there are two things that we can really greatly affect. One is the oxygen. So if we have this oxygen right here, obviously, if we have ourselves a nice little pine tree, then we want to keep the fire down on the dirt, down at the very bottom, so that way we don't have as much oxygen. Because up here, there's much more potential for there to be oxygen on all sides of the fire, causing a superheated fire. The other thing is fuel. If we can make sure that we don't have a whole bunch of fuel just sitting around ready to burn, then we can make sure that this fire never has the opportunity to grow up into this tree. And so we want to make sure that we, as homeowners, are reducing the amount of fuel that a fire can have, and that we are also preventing the ability for fire to jump from point A to point B. So we want to make sure we can reduce the amount of oxygen that a fire has by keeping the fire on the ground. That is our goal. Can we keep the fire on the ground? And can we make sure that we don't have very much fuel on the ground? And if we do, can we put a brake that prevents the fire from continuing past a certain point? And there's a lot of things that we can do as homeowners. Now, again, as we said, fires are very, very, very important for our forests. So how is it that we got to the point that we no longer are able to control these fires? Well, there's really no way to say why that is. I don't think anybody actually knows the reason why. And that's probably because who would ever think that stopping a fire is a bad thing? Well, as it turns out, stopping fires, stopping natural, small, manageable forest fires is one of the most destructive things that can happen to our forests. So what we want to do is allow a forest to burn in a healthy way, because then that means that the plants are going to thrive, but we don't want our house to be burned. So in the next episode, we're going to start learning about the things that we can do as homeowners to make sure that our houses don't catch on fire and we make it through this fire season.